Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
Okay, are we ready to skip forward slightly in time? That was the time of Moses and subsequent years, then how it was that we had various thinking about things that were clean and unclean. Let's come up to the prophets now. The time of the prophets, usually for most of the prophets, that's around 500 to 600 years before Christ. So about 500 to 600 years before Christ, there was this prophetic insight. The prophets had this idea that it wasn't just an individual that could be unclean. It's one thing to say that Deacon Cleophas is unclean and to send him out of the town. But what happens if the entire people becomes unclean? So that, for instance, in Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel says, when the house of Israel dwelt in their own land, they defiled it. They made it unclean by their ways and their doing. So the things that the Israelites did made their land unclean. There's going to be a special problem now, because now we're not talking about one person being unclean. We're talking about the land they're living in being unclean. Their conduct before me was like the uncleanness of a woman in her impurity. Right? So we've said enough about that, right? The Bible's written in an androcentric world. The woman being clean and unclean in her impurity, we know that referred to then that natural cycle that all women go through. So the prophet continues, speaking in the name of God. So I poured out my wrath on them because they defiled. They made the land unclean. But what will happen? I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your uncleanness, and from all your idols I will cleanse you. So there was this idea. We're no longer talking about an individual, but we're talking about all the people who have become unclean now. But the prophet's telling us the good news. God is speaking through the prophet, purportedly saying, the good news is, I will make you all clean again. I'm going to sprinkle clean water on you, clean you of your uncleanness, and of all your idols I will cleanse you. Various themes that we see, for instance, that relate to this baptismal cleansing. Ezekiel is pointing to the promise of a new exodus, a new Passover, a new traversing of the wilderness, a new entry into Canaan. Let's unpack that for a moment. In the time of Moses, how did the ancient Israelites go from death to life? Follow me now. Death to life. They were in a place of slavery, Egypt. They eventually got to the promised land. How did they get from Egypt to the promised land? Through what did they pass? They passed through water. What water did the ancient Israelites pass through? They passed through, we often call it the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, more popularly translated, right? The Red Sea. When Moses led the people through the Red Sea, think of the baptismal imagery here, right? When you're baptized, you go into the water and come up out of the water. The ancient Israelites went into the water and came up out of the water into the promised land. Think of the symbolism for baptism there. And so Ezekiel was seeing how it was that was going to happen again. How is this people going to pass from the state of being unclean to being clean? There's going to be this new, we called it the Passover. When we went from slavery into the promised land, when we went through the Reed Sea or the Red Sea, there's going to be this new entry into the promised land, a new covenant. And so we would be passing through the Reed Sea then, the Red Sea, became a symbol of the waters of salvation, from death to life. We thought that we were going to die because here we were up against the bank of the sea. The Egyptians were closing in on us. We said, oh my God, it would have been better for us to die in Egypt. Now that all of the Egyptians are coming at us with all their chariots, we're going to die. Did we die? God took us from death to life.